Well, good morning and welcome to ELEVENSES. Sorry I'm a few minutes late there. I forgot to plug the laptop in overnight and the battery was completely flat when I tried to log in a few minutes ago. My mistake. Right, what have we got for you in today's show? It's show number 372. It's Wednesday the 4th of October. It's a reasonably bright morning here in London at the moment, and we'll be talking about the government's plan for drivers, which will have some benefits for motorcyclists if it all goes ahead. They want to encourage universal use of bus lanes for motorcycles. Meanwhile, in Dublin, bike thieves have tried to bump start an electric motorcycle. On the M9 in Scotland, police stopped a rider being towed by a car using a dog lead. I'm going to have a go at the media for continually using the term off-road bikers to refer to what they actually mean to be nuisance bikers. A study has found that the majority of the microparticles of plastic in the oceans actually come from vehicle tyres, and there will be price cuts on models from Zero and Triumph. That's almost unbelievable, isn't it? And then we'll look at the new Scrambler 650 from Royal Enfield and the Jawa 42 Bobber Black Mirror. And finally, we'll end up with the third part of my hairpin bends exploration, how to do it rather better and take the hairy out of hairpin as we start to go downhill. So grab yourself a brew, settle yourselves down for the next 40 minutes or so, and don't forget, if you've got a question, do ask away. I will try to get back to you if I possibly can during the show. If I can't, I will get back to you after the show has concluded. If you've got any comments, I'm always interested to hear what you have to say, and of course, nice if you let me know who you are when you log in. Nigel has just done that. Nice to see you. Says you might have to leave early. Well, you can always catch up later. As I like to point out to people, there are my shows are all over there on YouTube. They go out live Wednesdays and Sundays at 11, nearly always. Occasionally they're rescheduled or I have to miss one, but they're all over there on my Survival Skills YouTube channel on YouTube if you want to catch up after you've missed something. Right, so on with the show then. Well, the first thing I just want to tell you about is that after several, well, 3.5 years of work actually, I have finally got to the point where I can say that all of the articles I've written between 2014 and 2022 in my long-running Skills on Saturday and Tips on Tuesday series are now in the Ko-fi archive. Every single one of those articles is in the archive up to the end of 2022. So it's taken over 3 years since I began what has actually been a pretty mammoth task, I'll be perfectly honest, because many of those articles have been edited, rewritten slightly, sometimes updated to cope with new information. I mean, you know, things like traction control was only the very top range bikes had that back in 2014, so I have had to update some of them. And anyway, every piece there is now in place to 2022. 2023 is going up, of course, on a sort of regular basis as we go. Now, so that means by the end of December this year, there'll be a decade's worth of articles. That's around 1,000 essays covering all aspects of better biking. Now, if you sign up as a follower, it costs you nothing other than a moment of your time. You'll get an email alert to every new post. If you then head over, you can read them all for free. They stay free for at least a week. After that, there is a tiny charge of £3 to access the entire archive, which helps me maintain it, of course. Now, contribute once and you get a month's access to everything in those two series. If you sign up for £3 per month on a subscription basis, then you get access obviously for as long as you're subscribing, plus even more content, and I'm still adding to that as well. So it really is pretty tiny investment, all things to be told. It's less than half the cost of a bike magazine every month, and you get far more to read, of course. And if you actually buy something like the weekly paper Motorcycle News, that'll set you back £20 a month to have it delivered to your door. You can access the entire coffee archive for £3 a month, so it's 1/7 of the price, isn't it? So I'm sure you know where it is you need to head by now, but the address is www.coffee, that's ko fi.com/survival skills. Right, okay, so on with the show. What else have we got to talk about today? Well, a fair amount, of course. If I can get the picture to move forward, there we are. That's the news banner, isn't it? Oh, I got a couple of comments. Let's just look at the comments first. Kevin is saying, is this still going ahead? Yes, it is. He's online. Well, good to see you, Kevin. Right, okay, so the government's new policy paper, The Plan for Drivers, was published on Monday to coincide with the Tory party conference. Now, I won't repeat it verbatim, but I will touch on 2 points. And the first says that the government is giving drivers the tools they need to shop around and monitor prices while it considers whether further action is needed to protect consumers on fuel prices. Now, they say they will create a statutory open price data scheme for retail road fuel prices so that you can basically make an informed decision on where you fill up. You can have a look at, there are various apps that do this already, of course, but it'll mean everybody has to contribute by the sound of things. Now, whether it'll have any impact on high prices in certain areas, for example, here in London, where I live, it's often 10p a litre more expensive than it is in some parts of the country, I have no idea. But the second point is probably of more interest to most of us. The government also intends to, quote, strengthen guidance to local authorities on the operation of bus lanes. For example, bus lanes should only operate when bus services are running or when traffic flows are heavy enough to delay buses. Right, okay, so guidance. Basically that means the local authorities can still do what they want. They can still close a bus lane off completely for 24 hours if they want to. It's guidance only, it's not a statutory regulation from central government. And they also want to, quote, refresh the technical advice, making it clear local authorities should use their powers to ensure bus lanes are open to motorcycles. And they'll launch a consultation on motorcycles using bus lanes as a default. So again, whether that will actually have any impact at all is hard to say, because, as I say, it is advice to local authorities. It's not a regulation, and they won't be obliged to follow it. Action groups, of course, can point to this advice if they want to lobby for access to bus lanes, but it won't be a statutory duty to allow bikes to use them. Nevertheless, it is long overdue, and thanks to Malcolm for flagging that up for me. Right, over in Dublin, 4 bike thieves failed in their attempt to steal a motorcycle. Now, the incident was captured on CCTV. It has been posted on the social media platform formerly known as Twitter. It took place outside Carl Dieter's office in the North Inner City on Monday at around 5:30 in the evening, so broad daylight in front of lots of people. And the CCTV footage shows the 4 would-be thieves stopping on 2 motorcycles. One of them breaks the steering lock on the bike, and then he attempts to bump start it to steal it. 2 men rushed out of the office whilst he was in the process of trying this, and the thieves fled just before Carl also ran out, armed with a broom apparently. But anyway, the attempted robbery actually lasted less than 30 seconds, but has managed to cause €200 of damage. Carl said that the majority of other bike users that he knows, he rides with a social group apparently, have also either experienced a theft attempt or have had their bikes stolen in the last 6 months. But there was a very good reason that he said that they failed to bump start the bike. Speaking to the Irish Mirror, Carl said, quote, "I know why they went for it, but they have no brain if you're trying to bump start an electric bike. That's like trying to pour petrol into a Tesla." He said, quote, "They are literally Dublin's thickest criminals." Wonderful line there. Excellent stuff from there. All right, okay. Meanwhile, they do have some competition in Scotland where Scottish police, Dunbar, in fact the road police there, they also used X to announce that they had stopped a disqualified motorcycle rider as he was being towed down a motorway. Let's just zoom in on that picture for you. There it is. The bike, which appears to be a Husqvarna 610, like my brother used to own actually. There it is. It was being towed behind the car that you can see ahead in the picture there, and this is how it was being towed. There was a dog lead in the boot, the tailgate was shut on it, and so it was locked behind it, and the rider was being towed along by that extendable dog lead. The police said that the rider tried to do a runner, but he was caught after a short pursuit, and both driver and rider have been reported for multiple offences. It is legal to tow a motorcycle, incidentally, but only behind another motorcycle. I have to say, if it was me, I'd be using the incident as an advert for the dog lead. It must be pretty tough indeed if it can stand towing 130 kilograms of motorcycle plus rider. Right, okay, so interesting one there. Now, meanwhile, the ITVX website has a news section. Who knew that? I didn't. Not until I spotted the headline, "Campaigners say off-road bikers are taking over our roads," and they continue that figures reveal thousands of incidents. Now, I read that in some bafflement, envisaging roads clogged with happy but muddy riders of bikes like Kawasaki's KX450 or the CRF 250 Rally from Honda, rolling into town and parking up at the local butty bar before refueling and heading off to putt quietly down the next green lane. But of course it turns out what they mean are not off-road bikers at all, but nuisance bikes and quads that are unregistered, uninsured, ridden by people with no bike licenses and usually with no helmet. And of course a number of these machines will actually have been stolen in the first place, like the bike that I've just talked about in Scotland. Now, there's no doubt that nuisance bikes and their riders are genuinely a problem, as well as their illegal use on roads, pavements and in parks. There are regular reports of these riders tearing up golf courses, cricket and soccer pitches by riding their machines on these surfaces. Now, it's equally clear that the police are struggling to do anything meaningful about it, but there genuinely seems to be little will to tackle the problem at the top level. Now, as the previous item illustrates, as I've said before, the security built into modern motorcycles is woeful. And whilst there is a genuine market for off-road motorcycles, electric bikes and quads, there also needs to be some mechanism to make it far more difficult for these machines to end up in the hands of people who misuse them. Now, whether that's to introduce a sort of an identification scheme, some kind of marking that can't be removed or defaced, or even, sort of something like the tracker that's what's it called? I've forgotten the name of it now. The data tag, that's the one which you drop in and hide in the frame and you can't get out without actually destroying the frame. I don't know what the solution to that is, but please, if you run a news channel, stop calling them off-road bikers. They are not off-road bikers. They are nuisance bikers. Right, Christine's looked in. Good morning, Christine. Now, after that little rant, another one. As you may know, back in dim distant past, I got my master's degree in ecology, so I'm always interested in the impact that our chosen forms of transport have on the environment itself. And unfortunately, some recent studies are showing some worrying facts. Now, it seems that the plastic that in the oceans, the microscopic particles that actually the bulk of the plastic that you find in the ocean, it seems that the majority of this actually comes from worn tyres. Now, a report by the Pew Charitable Trust, I've no idea who they are, but they claim that 78% of the ocean microplastics are based on synthetic tyre rubber. Now, tyres are made up of over 400 different compounds altogether, many of which are known to have negative effects on health. The particulate emissions which come from wearing out our tyres and our brake pads is now believed to exceed the mass of the carbon particulate tailpipe emissions which come from burning petrol and diesel. The exhausts have been cleaned up so much, it's now believed that that contribution to particulates is declined massively, and so the dust is mostly from brakes and tyres, but that's only just beginning to receive interest from researchers really. Now, a British firm called Emissions Analytics, again I don't know who they are, but they have reportedly found that a car's 4 tyres collectively release, wait for this, 1 trillion ultra fine particles for every single kilometre, 0.6 of a mile, that the car is driven. And these particles are tiny, they're less than 100 nanometers in size, and that makes them small enough to pass directly through the lungs and into the blood. They can even apparently cross the body's blood-brain barrier and end up in the brain matter. Now, Imperial College London, someone we probably have heard of, they've also studied the issue, and they say that there is emerging evidence that tyre wear particles and other particulate matter may contribute to a range of negative health impacts, including heart, lung, developmental, reproductive and cancer outcomes. Now, it's an emission problem that actually won't go away, of course, with the transition to EVs either. Now, EVs do have the benefit of regenerative braking, and so once they hardly ever need a really hard press on the brakes, that should reduce brake dust. Tyre wear is actually higher on EVs, partly because of the extra torque from the motors, which means people tend to put their foot down and enjoy the acceleration, but also because they weigh more, and when that you're trying to accelerate that mass by stopping, starting or cornering, you're going to wear those tyres out more rapidly. Now, in the EU, Euro 7 standards will regulate tyre and brake emissions from 2025 for cars, vans, trucks, that kind of thing, but so far I believe there's nothing on the cards for motorcycles. But maybe, just maybe, next time you're thinking of fitting a soft compound tyre to your bike for some hypothetical more grip, just think again and maybe go for a harder and longer lasting sports compound tyre. So there we go. Have a think about that. Now, something that of course has gone up in price of tyres. Inflation has hit the shelves in every respect, so it's pretty hard to believe that 2 motorcycle manufacturers are actually cutting prices. Yes, believe it. Yesterday, Zero Motorcycles announced a permanent reduction in the manufacturer suggested retail price across all their remaining 2022 and 2023 models which are on sale in North America. The reduction is said to bring electric motorcycles within reach of more riders than ever before. Now, the reductions actually are fairly substantial. They range from $1,000 to $4,500. I'll let you do the calculation exchange rate for yourself, but it basically means their cheapest model, which is the 2022 FXNA Dual Sport with the 7.2 kilowatt hour battery, that now costs $10,995 after the reduction, which is a pretty significant drop. Whilst the 2023 DSR X adventure bike, which is their most expensive machine with the biggest 17.3 kilowatt hour battery, that gets a big reduction of $4,500, and that brings the price down to $19,995. If you may remember, I pointed out that the BMW GS 1300, which has just come out, that's over £1,500 brand new for the base model. Now, no word if the Zero price cuts are coming to the UK, but out of the blue, Triumph also announced that the incoming Triumph Scrambler 1200X would not only have a lowered seat and a revised engine that would deliver power at slightly lower revs, the bike would also come in at a lower price tag than the outgoing XC model. So priced at £11,895, Triumph say they've shaved no less than £800 off the old bike's on-the-road costs. So that's pretty amazing news there. Right, okay, Nigel has got a comment. He says he's complained about riders in his park to a couple of policemen while walking his dog. got told there's nothing they could do, as when they do catch them, they find they're on stolen bikes. So that's okay. Yeah, obviously not their job, says Nigel. Well, I'm not surprised. I don't like to knock the police, but sometimes I am baffled by their attitude. And Kevin says, are organic or semi-sintered pads kinder to the planet than sintered? As far as I know, the answer to that question is no. Now, I do know that one brake pad manufacturer, I think it was Brembo, and I did cover this in this show maybe a year ago, have brought out a range of green pads. So if you really are worried about the planet, maybe go and have a look and check out what they have on sale. But yes, they are basically, these pads are designed to meet the new Euro regulations. What I'll try and do is find that item for you and flag it up in the comments later. Right, so okay, on with the bikes section of the show. What have we got for you today when it comes to motorcycles? Well, I always like to keep up with what's going on, and Royal Enfield have been making huge inroads into the UK market. Quite astonishing the way the brand has bounced back from, well, bounced from nothing almost to a major player over here. And the current 650cc lineup is based on their 47 horsepower parallel twin engine, and it comprises the two original bikes, the Interceptor and the Continental GT, plus the recently released Super Meteor 650, which I'm not sure I actually covered. But there's a new bike on the way, and this is it. Now let me just zoom in again and let you get a closer look at that. This is the Royal Enfield Scrambler 650 and it's been seen out and about on the road. The bike gets block pattern tyres, as you probably have guessed. The spoked wheels are off-road pattern. Interestingly, it gets upside down front forks, and that's a change from the telescopic ones on the original bikes. But the rear, of course, still gets the conventional twin shock suspension there. You do get a single-sided exhaust system too, down from the twin exhausts on the original bikes. The bike also comes with a taller handlebar, a rather distinctive oval-shaped side panel, it says. Well, that doesn't look like an oval to me. It looks more like a lozenge. But anyway, and you get what's said to be a ribbed seat, presumably to give you a little bit more grip on it. Lighting's said to be full LED, and there's a simpler-looking offset speedo and instrument panel. Now, there are also rumours that the motorcycle will get a revised motor, and the final gearing is also likely to get some tweaks to make the machine more suited to off-road use, presumably. And as an aside, if you are heading to India, by the way, you can now rent a Royal Enfield in 25 different Indian cities, which I won't attempt to list and pronounce. Now, Royal Enfield has partnered with more than 40 motorbike rental companies, and they've established a fleet of over 300 rental motorcycles, and you can book those via the Royal Enfield rental website. Now, according to Royal Enfield, the rental program will permit you to hire motorcycles from just about any location in the country, and hopefully you can drop them off just about anywhere too, so that you can do a one-way journey and you don't have to circle back to your starting point. Right, okay, so if you have a long memory for motorcycles, you may remember when Jawa was a brand based in the old state of Czechoslovakia. It was actually founded way back in the 1920s. They've celebrated their 100th anniversary in the last year or so in Prague. And in the 1950s, Jawa was actually a top motorcycle manufacturer, and they exported their inexpensive two-strokes to over 120 different countries. Even if they weren't huge sellers in the West, they sold all over Africa. And the company never really coped, though, with the switch to cleaner four-strokes, and that's why now it's yet another formerly Euro brand which is owned by an Indian company. In this case, the moribund name was bought in 2016 and then resurrected in December 2018 by Classic Legends, and that company is itself owned by Mahindra and Mahindra. So Let's take a look at what they have just released, and this is it. This is the Jawa 42 Bobber Black Mirror. Now, Jawa do focus on retro style machines, so this fits right in with their ethos. Why retro? Because the bike features a chrome fuel tank, at least it does if you opt for the black colour scheme, which, not surprisingly, is mostly black. Now, the bike does come in some alternatives to this black mirror finish. You can pick from a kind of rust red, a white, and a two-tone red and white, all of which get the mirror effect, this time from an engine with polished rocker covers, polished fins, and polished cases. Now, whatever colour scheme that you plump for, the motor is Jawa's 334cc liquid cooled, fuel injected, single cylinder. The throttle body has apparently been upped from 33mm to a more substantial 38mm. There are revisions to the fuel map too, which is supposed to smooth out the engine a bit, I think. Now, power output's around 30 PS with peak torque at 32.7 Newton meters or 23 pound-feet, and that it gets transferred to the rear wheel via a 6-speed gearbox. You also get a slipper clutch. Now, one piece of good news is that the dual-tone diamond cut alloy wheels take tubeless tyres. The seat itself is adjustable. It presumably slides up and down the backbone of the machine that you can see there. And the rear monoshock has apparently also been tweaked to enhance the motorcycle's ride quality. Bike is supposed to get LED lights, does get a charging port, a digital console, and you get also upside down bar end mirrors, which I'm never very fond of, but hey ho, I suppose you can always turn them the right way up if you want to. Now, will it appear in the UK? Honestly, no idea whether it will or not, but given the success of the 350 range of Royal Enfield, I'd be surprised if they haven't given it some thought. Now, finally, today's in-depth piece. Now, it's the third part of my look at riding hairpin bends. What was I going to do before I came to that? Yes, I was just... no, it's all right. I'll come straight on to the in-depth piece. I haven't forgotten anything. Now, I started by looking at riding uphill in a hairpin bend after I showed various people having problems with them. I digressed last week to look at the mid part of the hairpin and why a good line is important, and I showed you a couple of people toppling off mid uphill hairpin. Today I'll look at descending into a hairpin. Now, this may seem easier, but actually plenty of riders in my experience will get themselves into a real tangle coming down mountains. Now, when I was talking about uphill hairpins, I talked about the need to drive through the steepest midsection of the corner by using the motor, but I also pointed out that because we're using that extra drive for just that very short period of the steepest slope, we actually need to be ready to control the bike's speed again so that we don't accelerate too early and run wide. And that the easiest way to do this is not by shutting the throttle as we come out of the steepest section, is actually by using the rear brake to control our speed. So all this goes back to our earliest days of riding around cones, learning slow control. The rear brake is often the vital missing link that riders forget between the old cones exercises and what they're doing in real life, and it's absolutely vital to fine-tuning our speed control as we go round hairpin bends. Now, once we figure we have to use the rear brake uphill, which may sound counterintuitive, it does make a lot more sense when we're coming downhill to remember to use it. And again, it's basically the same approach as going uphill. It's all about making sure we give ourselves plenty of time to deal with the trickiest bit of the corner, which is that central section where the slope is often steepest and we may be upset by the camber and conflicting with other vehicles coming in the opposite direction. So we need to give ourselves plenty of time to pick our line, set our speed, get the bike turning, using counterweighting, remember, and using that rear brake to prevent gravity from pulling the bike downhill and picking up speed and running wide just when we don't want it to. But it all starts, as I said, with getting the speed right in plenty of time. And oddly, a lot of riders are actually very tentative with the brakes coming downhill, and very often what this leads to is braking still as they're arriving at the corner. But since there's no runoff in the average hairpin, it really is absolutely essential that we are confident that we have got our speed off to the right level before we start to turn into the corner. So as I've said, about cornering generally, it's all about slow in, but with a hairpin it's doubly important. So make sure that the speed is off well before the corner. Now, another tip here is to try to minimize gear changes going down the hill. It might seem like you can just stick the bike into a nice easy gear, but why bother? If you don't change gear too much, then it's one less thing to worry about. You may be in bottom gear coming round the corner, but when you come out of the corner, don't immediately start changing up the gearbox. Stay in at least an intermediate gear where you have plenty of flexibility and let the engine rev rather than go up and down the box every time you get to a downhill section. You'll get much better engine braking that will help you prepare nice and early, and you won't be trying to shift gear mid-corner. Now, whilst there's nothing wrong with keeping the bike in a low gear and exploiting engine braking, we must have confidence to use the brakes going downhill too. Even if you are riding one of those BMW GSs which have a shed load of engine braking, once the throttle's shut, you've nothing left to slow you down. So even if you've only got the brakes on lightly, you have a lot more speed control over your speed using those brakes if you need them than you do relying on engine braking only. The brakes can fine-tune your approach speed. And don't forget, it really is easy to misjudge deceleration, particularly on a steeper slope thanks to gravity. So get both brakes on, even if you're only using them lightly and even if you don't really need them. And then make sure that you set your speed ready for the hairpin in plenty of time, because what you want to be able to do next is have sufficient time and space on the descent to look around the upcoming bend well before you get there. What you're looking for will be vehicles like coaches and lorries coming the other way, which are coming uphill, even other motorcycles. Bigger vehicles will need a lot of room, physical room, to get around the turn, and if the roads are narrow, the best answer may be, in fact, to stop. Easy enough. If you're coming downhill, you can let somebody else come up the hill and let those vehicles complete the turn before you go into the corner and end up competing for space. Now, don't forget, gravity is pulling us downhill, so if we're using both brakes down the hill to slow down, then it's much easier to remember not to take your foot off the rear brake, and then we can control our speed all the way through to the downhill tightest part of the corner with the rear brake. Now, just as we did when we're going uphill though, don't release the rear brake until the bike is completely round the corner and pointed where you want to go next, because if you do, gravity takes over, the bike accelerates too soon, and an accelerating bike will pick up speed and run wide. So that'll push you to the wrong side of the road or out onto the very edge of the tarmac. So hold the rear brake on all the way through the turn until you're upright, pointed where you want to go next. And don't forget, slip the clutch if you need it on a really tight turn. Don't just pull the clutch in and coast around, because you'll suddenly lose that engine braking. Now, a few final tips for hairpins generally. If you have a clear view and there's no traffic, we can often cross to the wrong side of the centre line to open out a really tight hairpin on a narrow road. Obviously, if there's a solid line down the middle, we shouldn't do that, but anything without lines or with broken lines, then there's no reason we can't do that. We just have to make sure we pull back to our own side as we exit the corner, but it's far better as an option than turning in too early, too tight, and then running wide later. If we're being tailgated by another vehicle through these hairpin bends, and there will be other riders, other drivers who are better at doing than we are, just back off on a straight and let that driver or rider pass you. Never forget that the bends where every vehicle has to turn on much the same lane are likely to lead to polished surfaces. They can be very slippery when they're wet. The tarmac is often rippled up by heavy trucks if there are buses and HGVs using that particular pass. And you may also find fuel spills, of course, on the tight corners. And of course, after rain or thanks to melting snow, expect water to run across the hairpin bend. Watch out for ice on a really cold day, and watch out for gravel or stone chips that have been torn out of the surface by those wheels on big vehicles as they scrub around the corner. If you're in a group, ride at your pace, not the pace of the leader or even the rider ahead or even the rider behind. Leave plenty of space so that you're not staring at the tail light of the bike in front. You need the ability to take your eyes off that bike in front of you and have a good look around for yourself. It's also essential to have space in front of you if the rider ahead makes a cock of it. I've seen plenty of examples of riders running into each other because they were too close together. So let the rider ahead finish the hairpin before you get there. I've got a video somewhere of two riders, one who there was a truck basically cutting the corner a bit, perhaps on the bend, but the rider didn't anticipate that, had to hit the brakes hard. He toppled over sideways and the rider behind him promptly ran into the back of him. So give yourself plenty of space, ride your own ride. If you rely on the guy in front to get it right and they don't, you'll end up in trouble too. Most of all, I would say, most riders tend to be a bit nervous about approaching hairpins if they're not really used to them, and it's absolutely essential we get the first few right, because if we get those wrong, we're going to be nervous about all the rest of them. So, you know, once we're tense and nervous, then our control will be destroyed and everything else goes wrong. So take your time, get the first few right. I would also say that don't forget that building any skill riding solo is not the same as riding two up, particularly of course if the bike is also loaded with gear. So the best time to discover this is actually in the Tesco's car park, not the other supermarkets of course are available. Not the first time we hit a hairpin bend in the mountains and wonder why we're struggling with the turn. And the final point, in a recent Skills on Saturday post, I talked about why we shouldn't be routinely trail braking on the road in response to an influencer's article that's saying we should. Now, I got a lot of pushbacks from proponents, including a guy in America, who said that it gives the bike more front-end grip and is thus, quote, safer. But what the point that these people are missing is every single time is if we're not using lots of lean angle, we already have plenty of grip to spare. We don't need to artificially go around manufacturing more grip that we're never going to be using. All we're doing if we trail brake into a corner at a fairly gentle angle of lean is actually make things more complicated by mixing and matching the cornering and braking forces at the same time. We're not using the artificial extra grip, we're just making riding more difficult for us. And if the most difficult bend of all is to get right at a downhill hairpin, it makes zero sense to try to carry more speed than we actually need to ride into the corner just to be able to brake to the apex. Think about it. Now, being able to brake in a bend, as I've said, is a good get out of trouble skill, but it doesn't mean it should become a technique that makes life difficult. If we can fix a mistake, fine, but don't make life more difficult for ourselves. Right, that is it. That is the third and final part of my exposition on hairpin bends. I hope you have enjoyed that. I hope you have found that useful. Don't forget, if you want something to read, you can check out my books over on my Lulu Publishers page. There is the URL, and you will find the book Survival Skills over there, which is a DIY guide to better riding. It starts with the easy stuff, it gives you practical exercises to follow, and as you develop your riding you move through more and more technical maneuvers on the bike, and you get more exercises to follow for each new section of the book. I forget what the price over there is at the moment, but pop over there, have a look. Buy yourself a copy, do yourself a favour, read it over the weeks and months of winter here in the Northern Hemisphere at least, and put it into good practice next year while you're out on the road. Right, okay, a couple of comments. Aaron says, I say never follow a tail light. If that tail light ends up in a ditch, yours is going there too. Absolutely, 100% with you on trail braking. He also says a silly fad. And Kevin also says just fitted new front ABCHH sintered pads. Right, okay. So, and Russell says thank you. Right, okay, you're all very welcome. Good to see you all. Thanks indeed for coming along today. Anything else I wanted to say before I go? Not that I can think of. I think we are at the end of the show. So once again, thank you all for looking in. I'm Kevin Williams. This has been Elevenses, and hopefully I will see you on Sunday for the next show. But meanwhile, stay shiny side up out there.